Hey everybody, it's Natalie Alicia Goldberg with the Gold Standard, and today I'm here with my dear friend, John Petrides. John, did I get that right?
Nope.
No,
Close though.
So please introduce yourself the right way with the right pronunciation of your last name.
John Petrides. Don't worry, it happens all the time.
So John Petrides joined Tocqueville Asset Management in 2019 as a portfolio manager within the wealth management group. Prior to joining Tocqueville, he has been a managing director and portfolio manager with Point View Wealth Management and a portfolio manager with Advisors Capital Management. He began his career with Bear Stearns Asset Management, becoming an equity analyst on the large cap value team. He's a regular guest on several financial news networks for his market insights and analysis. He received his M.B.A. from Pace University School of Business in 2005 and his B.A. from Fairfield University in 1999. And he has served as AmeriCorps Volunteer from 1999 to 2000. John, so
Yes.
wonderful to be with you. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I'm loving actually the background that you have, which is that beautiful serene blue. It's making me dream about the ocean. So John, look, the financial markets are going nuts. And it's no secret that a handful of stocks have done very well this year. We're talking Apple, Tesla, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. While the rest of the stock market has been at best.
Right.
So what can people do if they are owners of these stocks that have skyrocketed in value to truly protect themselves and their families?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and this pertains to a lot of your listeners. And we're in an environment now where giving back to the community is such a precedent, I think, in people's lives, right? Everybody wants to help. As we're all stuck in this pandemic, people want to help each other out. But at the same time, much to many people's surprise, the stock market has had a massive run, from where we were 7-8 months ago. I mean, who would have thought that we would have touched all-time highs in the stock market as we're stuck in a pandemic? It's pretty crazy. We have, unfortunately, 200,000 people have died in the U.S. because of COVID. We still don't know where this is all headed, yet stocks are at all-time highs. But the interesting thing about the stock market is that it's being pushed ahead only by a handful of companies, really. I mean, you think about companies like Apple and Amazon, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Adobe, all of these big large cap, Facebook, all these big large cap technology stocks have driven the market higher. And odds are investors have these in their portfolio somewhere, whether it's individual stock positions or portfolios. And what we've been helping clients do is, as these positions have become too large within a client portfolio, well, what do? Well, if it's in a taxable account, you don't want to sell it really and leave somebody with massive realized capital gains and burden them, with a huge tax bill at year end. So what we've been advising certain clients to do is actually donate the shares. Maybe open a donor advised fund or a charitable fund. Donate it to family members. Donate it to your religious church organizations. Donate it to your charitable fund. So that way you're doing three things. You're helping the cause that you believe in, whether that's passing it on to your family, passing it on to the charity, passing it on to your charitable fund. You're doing it in a tax efficient manner where you're not paying the capital gains. And in fact, you actually get the ability to write off the capital gains. So, it's kind of like a win-win for all from a risk management standpoint, from a diversification standpoint, and from a giving standpoint, in a time when, I think all three of those things are very relevant in people's lives.
So, John, is there a particular impetus that is making this a conversation right now as we are about 6 weeks out from the election?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a good question. I appreciate where you're leading that towards. We're approaching the end of the year, right? So when you're talking about tax planning and giving and things like that, now's the time to do that anyway. Now is the time where you start planning that and getting the wheels in motion. But you're exactly right that we all know that if Joe Biden has already said that if he were to win, one of his plans will be to increase the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. when you increase taxes on corporations, that's not going to be a good thing for the stock market, at least in the short run. He's also talked about other things like, or other ideas are being floated out there of possibly eliminating a step up in cost basis, right? So you know that when someone passes and you pass your assets on to the next of kin, they get the step up in cost basis. So there's no embedded or historical unrealized capital gains. That could be taken away. There's also talks about increasing the tax rate on unrealized capital gains. Somewhere right now it's around 20% or so, depending if it's short term or long term. And there's talks about that increasing it maybe to your income tax rate. So, there's a lot of things involved, and clearly the political dynamic, if there is, I think, a Democratic sweep, but clearly if led by Joe Biden, over time, those are real possibilities to equity investors.
And I think it's a brilliant point you brought up. And I just want to explain the way I do to my clients what a step up in basis is for people who might not be aware. Let's say you bought your house 30, 40 years ago for $50,000 or $100,000. And today that same house is worth $1 million. Well, at death, if it's passed at death through a will or a trust, or if there's no will and you go through an administration, it's now given to your kids at the $1 million level, similar to your investment accounts. If the step up in basis is taken away, your kids could be getting that piece of property, in our example, at the price you bought it at, which is the $100,000, and paying the tax, about 25%, depending on which state you live in, between state and federal, and sometimes even more if you're like a California resident, for example, on the difference between the $100,000 and the $1 million that they sold it for. That could lead to a $200,000 or $300,000 tax bill. Is that about right, John?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, not only are we seasonally at the time to talk about estate planning actions and have actionable items, because the way the stock market has ran up and how certain positions have been concentrated in certain client portfolios, it's also politically or structurally the right time to do it as well, as there could be a change of guard on the political side of things. Look, we're in this mess with COVID, right? We're spending a tremendous amount of money, rightfully so in my opinion, to stop the patient from bleeding, right? You can't fix the cause of the patient still bleeding. So the government and the Federal Reserve have spent a ton of money to sort of stop this situation as best as it could back in March, April, and May. And then basically we'll figure out the consequences later. But none of this is for free. We have to pay for it at some point in time. Yes, the U.S. has taken a lot of debt. There's $25 trillion of debt on the U.S. balance sheet, which is, the kick the can down the road policy for future generations to deal with. And, what are we going to do? We're in unprecedented times, but, we have to pay. It has to be paid for in some way. And, the Federal Reserve is doing it on their end by basically printing so much money, it's going to deflate the value of the dollar to help stimulate expense, to force us to spend more money. But taxes are going to rise. That's just
John, are you saying there's no such thing as a free lunch?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
So, John, if you could tell, people who are watching this right now, who are worried about their financial future, what is the one tip you can give them that is your number one tip that you lead with?
So, actually, Natalie, in investing, there is something there is a free lunch. It's called diversification. It doesn't cost anything to diversify your portfolio across different asset classes, such as stocks, bonds, and cash, across different sectors, such as technology, healthcare, energy, financials, across different types of assets, whether they be liquid or illiquid, real estate or investments. So, focusing on diversification, in our opinion, is the biggest thing that investors can do, because, hey, you don't know when a COVID is going to happen. If you had a massive amount of your wealth tied up in the stock market in February and COVID happened in March and stocks sold off, basically from February 20th to March 23rd of about 35%, and you sold at that point in time because you got fearful, well, then you just destroyed, generational wealth, basically. So by having your assets, in different buckets, to protect against the times that are unforeseen, that is, risk management 101 when managing portfolios. And again, going back to sort of this concentration, who doesn't like stocks that go up? And technology stocks keep continuing to go up. And it almost seems like there's no end in sight. If I said to you right now, what could Amazon do that's possibly wrong? You're like, probably nothing. I buy everything from Amazon.
Everything.
Right, everything. E-commerce is dominating the world. And what about Apple? Well, all I own is iPhones and iPads and all these other devices. What can Apple do wrong? It's got $200 billion in cash on its balance sheet. What can Microsoft possibly do wrong? All these things that, because these stocks keep going up, they look like there could be nothing that they can do wrong. And when you fall into that trap and get complacent that something's always going to go up and to the right, is when there's pure risk. That's when you leave yourself most vulnerable, which is why, again, going back to, possibly from an estate planning standpoint, donating some of those positions in your taxable account where they become such large positions in your portfolio to diversify. Or on the other hand, if you own, some of these stocks in your tax sheltered accounts, like an IRA or a Roth IRA, well, check to see where they are. Check to see if they're too high of a position. And in our world, my world, when I see a position, one stock get to 8, 9, 10% of a client's portfolio, that to me is too risky.
I'm laughing, John, because I come from a family where, my mom put 100% of her stock portfolio in the company stock. And thank goodness she finally listened to us. That is not a good idea.
Natalie, I'm living proof of Bear Stearns.
Yeah.
Bear Stearns was ground zero of the subprime mortgage crisis back in 2007 and 2008. And I know many colleagues and friends that had all of their money tied up in Bear stock. And, the thing went down the toilet and basically was sold to JP Morgan for a cup of coffee. So, I live that and preach it every day since then.
And John, what I love too about what you said is diversification. And I'll even add one more thing, if I may. It's beyond what you're actually buying. It's what is the moat protecting all of your different assets.
Yep.
And in my world, it's trust, the right structuring, LLCs, trust, it's protection, protect the asset.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we also work with, with a lot of clients who have, if they have a trust or estate plan that has to throw off some cash flow. I know this is a topic that you and I talked briefly about the other day, is that, you want to protect the moat of what's in the trust, right? The principal amount of what you're giving to your heirs and you're giving to that next generation to grow off of. And we have, an enhanced income strategy that's kicking off 5% yield right now. And most trusts, by and large, have some sort of cash flow generating mechanism where the trustee or the beneficiary should take out, X percent per year, call it 5%, right? At a certain time frame. So our goal is, can we kick off enough cash flow where the trustee or the beneficiary doesn't have to touch the principal of the portfolio, right? You don't want to raid the principal. You want the cash flow to kick off every year so it provides that distribution so you're not eating at the corpus and you're allowing that to grow over time. And again, what's the whole point of this? To set on and use your hard work that you've done today to provide for future generations. Because, unlike our parents, the government's not going to be there to do that for us. Pensions don't exist for us like they did for our parents and our grandparents. Social Security, I'm not banking on Social Security when it's time for me to retire.
What's Social Security?
Yeah, and I'm not banking on Medicare, to help cover my expenses when I'm older and ill and things like that. I'm planning on this that I have to cover those expenses myself. and
And
that my
John, it's
kids
a
are going to
great
have to
point
expense those
because
themselves.
Medicare, what people don't get is that it covers a fraction, okay? But when you need home care, when you need a nursing home, Medicare says good luck after a certain amount
Right.
of days.
Yep.
So now you're either getting into a Medicaid trust and basically liquefying your life and saying, I give up ownership of everything, or you're paying 20 grand a month, and that's today's dollars.
Totally.
You know, we have
Yep.
to have a better risk management strategy. People need to have long-term care insurance.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, Natalie, all the points that we're talking about, whether it's, in estate planning, I think gets caught up in a stigma that it's the uber wealthy that have to do estate planning, that it's those people with 20, 25, 30 million in investable assets are the only people out there, those that where they're above that current $22 million threshold on the federal level, for estate taxes, where those are the only people that this pertains to. And that's just not true.
No.
Anyone with assets that they're looking to pass on to their next of kin qualify as having to do estate planning, right? That's all you're doing is you're preparing for the next generation. And that's not just for a specific asset class. And by the way, we work with a lot of clients with their families and their kids and their grandkids, educating everybody on the process, of what this means. So
It's
not just
brilliant, John,
for
because there is
group.
this saying, as we know in our industry, it's t-shirts to t-shirts in 3 generations.
Right.
So unless your children and grandchildren are learning about opening up their vessel and truly appreciating the money, knowing what to do with it, knowing how to properly invest it, to have it grow,
Yep.
Divorces, creditors, I mean, those are things, taxes, just chomping at the bit if you do the improper plan.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's exactly right. And listen, how many people today are probably, Tocqueville is an asset management firm. We do not sell annuities. We do not sell life insurance. We do not sell long-term care insurance. But how many people today during COVID woke up and said, wait, we don't have an insurance plan. We don't have life insurance. What happens if we were to become ill? What happens if one of us dies because of COVID? What happens then? And, so you have.
And there's no excuse, John, because today these companies are literally doing, you just fill out a health application online. They're not even doing a blood test.
That's unbelievable.
And people can get up to $2 million in term insurance, which will cost them pennies. The Starbucks savings that you have every month because you're not going to Starbucks anymore, it pays for your life insurance.
Totally. And, listen, we're in an environment where it's work from home, right? For the most part, where most people who were commuting to their office aren't. And so there's a bit more time on people's hands today, by and large, in general, than what there may have been because you're not commuting. And it's a good time to reflect on your own financial plan, your own financial goals. Do you have a will? If you didn't have a will pre-COVID, and if this doesn't inspire you to get a will, you need to get a will done. You need to figure out a plan that if, God forbid, if the unexpected, like a pandemic, were to happen, what happens to your assets, And if you don't have a will, you leave a nightmare for your family to take care of.
Even with the will, it still goes through a probate court. You need more planning. You need a trust. And there are ways to not have to do a trust. If all your assets are in a financial institution, we can appoint a beneficiary on that account. And lo and behold, we've done our trust plan. We don't have to have a full trust. But if you have property, if you have LLCs, I mean, people don't realize that it's a holistic plan. And let's say that the court was fine, and let's say it went quickly, which it doesn't, and let's say it wasn't expensive, which it is. Do your beneficiaries know everything that you have, where it is, and how to get it?
Yep. Now, I know personally during this time, I've made out a spreadsheet, every account that's in my family's name, that we have, the website, the link, who to contact, God forbid, something happens, that it's sort of teed up as best as possible for others to follow, because it becomes a mess. So, now is a good time. It's sort of a blessing in disguise, at least from a financial planning and from a portfolio management standpoint, and from a life planning standpoint, where if those that have been procrastinating from getting their ducks in a row, you're allowed this window here now to really, protect your downside. And I always start with, when I'm talking with clients, and starting backwards. Okay, if you were to die, what happens? What happens to your family? What happens to your kids? If your wife was to die or your spouse was to die, what happens to you and your kids? How would you handle that? If you were both to die, what happened? You know, and then you go down to, well, if you were to get disabled, you know, if you were disabled, does your company have disability insurance? Or what happens how would you cover those expenses? And you basically walk backwards from the worst possible case scenario down to the little things, you know, and then you get into the minutia of other types of risk management. You know, most people will think their worst possible scenario is they lose their job. That's really, you know, worst possible scenario is we die, you know, and what happens to your family, you know.
No more jobs after that. Not in this
exactly. Most people will put unemployment ahead of losing their life. So, you know, you have to start with the biggest risk component and then work backward to the smallest risk. And I think that's what we spend a lot of time with our clients trying to figure out.
Well, John, you are always a wonderful resource and a wonderful expert. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and our viewers. And look, people need to take advantage of this time, as you said. Look at the silver lining in this pandemic and get out there and get a plan.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I love being on the show.